So in order to make a double coil in Modo, you may want to look at the deformation tools, as they essentially give you non-destructive modeling tools. So I'm going to start with a curve. Let me just put a curve down, which is, at the moment I'm creating one that's 60 meters long because I've done a dry run and I know that 60 meters is the length that I want. Let me switch off snapping and just remove the ruler tool. And let me just quickly check if this curve is actually sitting at the origin. So I want the bottom of this curve to be at the origin. And let me just hit the D key a few times just to add resolution, because we want to have enough resolution so the deformation is going to work. Let's see. Okay, 1025 vertices. I think that's gonna be more than enough resolution. So now we can start applying deformations. The first one I'm going to apply is a bend. And I'm not going to use length. It's not really that you can't use it, it's just that I prefer not to use it. I want to define the radius, which will be the smaller radius of the coiling. So it'll become clear in a minute, I hope. And what I can do now is I can start dialing in the angle. Now let me just get a bit closer. As you can see here, once I hit 360, the curve essentially starts to, it continues bending, but it simply starts doubling up on itself. And of course what we want eventually is for this curve to not double up on itself, but to move away from the spot, essentially move along the axis. So in order to do that, we're gonna have to apply a second deformation. And let me just quickly do that now. I select the mesh again. I'm going to apply a transform deformation. No, transform is really just a way of adding a position, scale and rotation deformation to the whole mesh. And if I go into my deformers list, I can see that the transform I've just applied sits on top of the bend. Now the way the deformers list works is that you have to read it from the bottom up. So this is the first deformation that has been applied, and then the transform gets applied. So if I were to do a transform now using this deformer, I would get something like this. Essentially my whole mesh just rotates, and that's not what I want. What I want to do is I want this transform to happen first and then the bend. So I can simply drag it to the top. So now my transform is going to be applied first and then my bend. And if as soon as I do it like that, you can see what happens. I get a coil. And I know from my dry run that I want it to be relatively, yeah, about 9 degrees, minus 9 degrees, that's fine. Let me just dial in a higher number here. Essentially this angle wants to go quite high. You can see it's sort of wrapping around itself now, and you can see that because it's at an angle, because of that transform, it's now bending the way you want it to do. Let's dial in 16,000 because I know that that's sort of eventually what I have to get to. There you are, nice coil. And now in order to make a double coil, I'm just going to do the same thing again. Let me just call this one angle 1, and the bend I will call bend 1. And with this mesh now selected, I'm going to apply yet another transform. This time I will rotate it in the y-axis. And let's just give it something like, yeah, about 20 or so, 15, 20. Okay, but let's make it 18 then. And I will call this one angle 2. And now I will apply another bend, which I will call bend 2. Now this bend I'm going to do around the x-axis, around this axis, and again I'm not going to use length. This time I'm going to give it a bigger radius of about 150, and there we go. So now I'm coiling the coil. And again you can see that because I had this second angle applied, again it's sort of moving away from the center, which is essentially the effect we're looking for. So there you have it, a double coil. Let me just quickly make all these invisible so we can see a bit better what's happening here. And let me just also make the vertices invisible. So one of the good things about this way of working is that we now can start dialing in different numbers and come up with a coil that we're happy with. So we can do this. Now of course we get we're gonna need more of this bend tool. Well, let's just dial in 20,000. And here let's dial in 10,000. That's 1,000, 10,000. Okay, that's more like it. So by simply dialing in different numbers, thank you, we can change the characteristics of our double coil. Like for instance in the bend one we can just change radius. Again, we probably need more here. But you can see it gives you an incredibly flexible way of working. And of course what you can do now is in the mesh you can just make sure that the curves render. So it gives you render curves, bring up the preview renderer, and there you are. Let's make it a bit thinner, 25 mil. Let's just change this angle again to 60 mil where I started. And there you have it, the double coil, with all its parameters still exposed to you. Now, one thing you may want to do now is move this coil around. This double coil, I should say. You can do this in different ways. You can give yourself yet another transform, and this transform you can just simply use as a way of moving around the whole coil, whole double coil I should say. You can move it, rotate it, and scale it. Another way of doing it of course is just by freezing this curve, and then you can start using it as a basis to extract all sorts